About a month ago, I published a video on a new table design, one of my creation. And really, I say that when I combined a bunch of different elements that I'd learned about in a way that I hadn't seen anybody else do. And I kind of explained the thought processes getting to that design so that I could claim it's my design, even though probably in history somebody has done it before, because nothing is new in woodworking. But I had an idea for a follow-up video, and I thought it was probably going to be one of the best concepts I've ever come up with, in that the first video from last week was me just exercising a prototype. It was built mainly with hand tools, with techniques I knew, to efficiently make one table. But I work art markets, I work craft markets. A lot of my work is small batch production, making 12 of an item at a time. And I wanted to come up with a video that would show people how to make this table design in a small shop in batch production runs, and do it at 3 different levels. You would have a DIYer who might only have some powered hand tools, maybe like a circular saw, a jigsaw, a hand drill, maybe a few hand tools and stuff like that. Then maybe a little bit more serious amateur, or I would call them a side hustler or something like that. Somebody's making a little bit of money at the craft who might have a little bit better powered hand tools, something like a track saw or a domino, or maybe even a table saw and drill press. And then you had the pros who had access to CNCs and stuff. So that was 3 different levels of woodworkers, all making the same design to the same quality level in order to actually merchandise them in art markets or wholesale them to a local retailer or something like that, in order to earn the money to reinvest so that they could move up a level, so to speak. That was the concept. And I started executing it, and I knew it was probably going to be me building 15, maybe 16 different tables to do this execution. And I've been editing as I go along now, and right now, even cutting out all the fluff, or as much as the fluff as I can do, because I am kind of wordy, I'm already well over 2 hours of really dense content. And I know nobody is going to click on a 2-hour video on YouTube. So I've got to break it apart. So today's video is a first part of that episode, in where I actually built I want to say 6 tables. I'd have to go back and look. I think 6 tables, each one with entirely different dimensions, entirely different aesthetics, but all of them using the same design build techniques of the captured sliding dovetail with a staked leg. And in doing so, each one I explored something unique that I could apply in a production run of one of those 3 categories. And I'll let you watch the video to show you not only different types of tables you can make with this method, but understand the methodology I use to create the processes to make these tables as efficiently as possible later on down the road. The next video I'm doing is pretty much taking those 3 classes of woodworkers and showing you how to build the jigs, how to design the processing, the different methods of processing the material as efficiently as you can with your given resources. And it basically came down to coming up with 3 entirely different production methods for the same table. And then I'm going to separate a 3rd video where I'm actually just going to make me a production run of these that I'm going to put up for sale at art markets, see if a local distributor wants to do them or something like that, and I'll share with you my results. It's something I haven't seen any other content creator do, in that I'm encouraging y'all to do the side hustle in order to gain some resources to progress your craft. And I'm letting y'all follow along as I work through all the difficult parts so you don't have to. So here's the first part of this series. I didn't plan for it to be a series, but it's just too big. So when you hear me reference later on in the video, I'm probably talking about the next video in the series. So, welcome to Worth the Effort Woodworker, you side hustlers. Let's make some tables. Now, after a lot of thought, I decided that the standard table I'm going to be building in my production runs is 18 by 18. And I'll give you a lot of reasons why later on in the video. But before I kind of finalize my production techniques for that table, I wanted to play around and experiment and just try different things. Ugly things. Things I don't think I would work, but maybe I'll learn something in the task. And the first one of those tables I did using this production or I guess a build technique of the captured dovetail with a staked leg is this little pew bench. Now this one, what I wanted to do was experiment with how to build the tops, because this is quite a bit bigger than the production ones I'm going to be doing, so it would exasperate any kind of errors. And you know, doing production techniques of going to the jointer like I did in the prototype video, jointing one face, making sure you have a 90 degrees, then running it through the table saw to make the other side parallel, then running it through the thickness planer. Well, that takes a lot of time. What I try to do is take the 2x4s I created out of the 2x12s, because basically I'm making glorified 2x4s out of my material so I can just get the best 2x4s out there. And all I did was I jointed the edges so I could glue them up straight all the way across. And I figured that if I got them close enough, I could just sand it flat, because there is such a thing as flat enough for a lot of styles of tables. This pew bench being one of them. Well, that didn't work. When I ended up gluing them all up, it was kind of warpy, baily and stuff like that. So by the time I got it flat, decently flat enough, it was just going to be too thin. So what I ended up doing is I recut those into basically 9-inch sections, and I ran those through my thickness planer without jointing them. And that came out flat enough. And then I could biscuit them, the three pieces together, to create one level area. And at the bottom, you know, it has a little bit of a ledge, but who really cares? So what I learned from that was I don't necessarily have to joint, meaning make the original side perfectly flat, because 2x4s have a little flex to them. But once you glue them all together, that 2x4 now becomes a 2x32 that doesn't have flex. So if I'm going to be gluing them together, at least do it in sections. Don't glue it all the way through. Lesson learned. Also, I played around with another leg design. This kind of table is typically put outdoors in soft material, so I knew I had to have a thick bottom so it wouldn't sink into the ground that much. So what I ended up doing was I only tapered the top third from square stock to create the tenon right there, and then I took a bevel gauge, not a round over, to all the edges to create somewhat of an octagon leg that had a wide leg, but it kind of tapered a little bit up to the beginning. Not sure if I like the design, but because this is such an angular table, this right here is the only round part of the whole design. So I thought it somewhat worked. Also, because this is a tripod, I did not dovetail in this piece. I just cut it to that thickness and face glued it down, because that's a long grain to long grain, and then the mortise went in there. And it's pretty stable. One design aspect I did discover though is I was trying, like I did in my prototype, to create the bottom of the leg right here out towards about where the table was. But in a tripod design, it would be a little bit better to flare it out a little bit more. This is fairly stable, but it does have a little bit of a wiggle. Now, a little side note. This was my weird table design, something totally different, most experimented with. A lot of the techniques I used to build it were the same ones I did in the prototyping stage. A lot of hand tools to get all the angle legs right. I didn't use too many jigs because my plan was this was going to be a weird one, and I was going to give it away to a local YouTuber. So Quick little game. Let's play a little bit of Where's Waldo. Think you know where this table is going to show up on another YouTube channel? Or what channel it will be? I'll give you a hint. I'm mixing up some milk paint right now, and it's going to be OD green. So with this second table I built, my experimentation was more on the lessons I'm going to be teaching those people that don't have a lot of the power tools. Maybe they have powered hand tools. So I was practicing some of those techniques. For example, on this top, I did not thickness all the boards until after they were all glued up. My thinking was that somebody could use a hand plane or maybe a jointer or a power jointer or something like that and join up 2x4s going all the way across. And yes, the boards might be wavy like that, but with a simple biscuit joiner, you could get the tops at least all level, and then just with some kind of sander, at least smooth it out. It won't be perfect, but it will be accessible to people that only have, DIY hand power tools. The other things I was experimenting with this particular table design were the legs. Yes, I did do a tapered down leg, more traditional, but the tenons themselves. Because I'm working with southern yellow pine, construction grade lumber, there are a lot of compromises I have to do. The thickness of the legs is one of them, because southern yellow pine has some flex, and this table has a little bit of movement. It isn't the joinery, it's the actual wood itself. And that's why when I build with this one, I typically have to go a little bit thicker than I would like a hardwood or something like that. For a light application table like this one, this is roughly 45 inches by 30 inches. I think it is the perfect size for, in a small backyard porch or something like that, because you actually have enough room for 4 people to eat at, or maybe play dominoes or something like that. Perfect size for students to do. I'm probably going to be putting one that laminate whiteboard that I use on my router table on top of this and sell it as a student desk to some parents. Right now it's really high because I don't know what the final application will be, so by making it high, if it goes to a student, I can cut down the legs a little bit more. If it goes into an apartment, maybe I can make it level with whatever else furniture they have, or I could just cut it down to a standard 32-inch height. But having it tall at this stage gives me options. But getting back to that joinery, because I'm doing with southern yellow pine, up until this point I'd always been doing the tenons of them at 1 7/8, and I wanted to see how far smaller I could get down to. So this table I did about 1.5, and based upon the movement and stability, for southern yellow pine, I think that's about as low as I'm going to go. But I do believe once I start playing around with cherries, oaks, and stuff like that, I can go down to a 1-inch tenon and get a lot thinner legs right here. But for a table this size, I think they're appropriate. The other thing, because I was just kind of practicing the DIY, I wanted to be able to consistently be able to cut those mortises. So I came up with one design for a handheld jig that you can just do with a router. And basically, because the angles, you basically only have 2 angles. Each corner is going to be the same, but these 2 sides are going to be opposites. They splay out different directions. So you have to have a jig that can accommodate both of those. And that's what I did right here. And basically all you do is you take the batten, you pump it up, you put the Forstner bit on the right side, get it going straight, and then bring it down until you touch the little notch on the top lever. And that gives you an accurate angle and an accurate splay. Now, is it going to be to the perfect degree? Probably not, but it will be consistent throughout the entire table, and that's all that really matters. And I'll go into how to build this later on in the video. Some other things I experimented with was the edge treatment, because these are about 1.5 inches thick to give it some real strength and solidity, but I don't like the 1.5 inch thick edge, so I always put some kind of edge treatment. And again, going for somebody that just had simple hand power tools or even just a block plane or something like that, I did a slight round over here. Not quite sure I like that. If I had a different bit, maybe a router table or something like that, I could make a really nice cove, keep the thickness for the strength, but create a little bit thinner edge to make the table visually look lighter. I'm not sure if I just like that little round over. and I left the top square so that I could laminate that whiteboard to it. So here was the second experiment when I got to explore different hand power tooled angles to this approach, so I can bring that to you later on in the video. But I'm glad I did this size. I do not believe I would do a production run of this size table, but it is something I could see myself offering. Maybe this would be the table I use to display all the other stuff. And the main reason I don't think I would put it in a production run is because the size doesn't really fit the tools that I currently own. We will get into those kind of specifics in much more detail, because the tools you own dictate a lot of the stuff that you can batch out and the profitability you'll be able to get from them. And on the third table, the big experiment was, do you even have to laminate the top together with this design? You know, a typical picnic bench, the individual slats are separate with a little gap in between them so the water can pass through. It won't collect on the top and it'll dry out a little bit quicker, maybe last a little bit longer. Well, with a sliding dovetail, could you just slide them on in their position, maybe glue each one at that slot and see if it works? That's what this was all about. Making a small picnic table for the new shop that we're building. Hey, upcoming series, we're going to be finishing out an interior wood shop, so stay on the channel. Anyways, let's look at some of the other details I did on this table as experiments. Now, as you can see, all the slats are separated, and the one that I did first was I glued this one on, and then I would slide in spacers, bump them up, and right before I got in, I put a little glue in and slid them on there. And that did seem to work just fine, but knowing there's one flaw in my design, and because of that, at the end, I did go over and put 2 screws underneath each little batten right here, just to be sure that they don't move. The other really big experiment I wanted to try was to see if this kind of anchoring system between them all would accommodate a really warped board. One of these boards warped beyond repairability, I would say. And I've actually forced it into alignment. You can see it's a little bit thicker there than it is there. This is the board that warped, and I'll show you a video of when I was gluing them up. But the big flaw I see was my batten design. I've got my dovetails and I got this overhang right here. Well, in this type of setup, it would have been better if I just did the dovetail without this overhang, because right now water is going to sit on these and kind of wick its way up on the inside, and that's kind of the reason why I put the screws in there, is in case the glue does fail because it gets wet, the screws will hold it together. Also, another feature I did is I put a bevel on all the boards. That way, as debris kind of gets lodges in here, I've always found that on picnic benches they kind of get stuck. Well, if it opens up at the end, it'll more easily fall through. And another experiment with this table was putting in a center batten. That was kind of critical with this design because they are all separated. This will keep them, if one warps this way, the other warps that way, it's going to keep them all in line. And by having them in line in the middle, as it goes out, they won't dip as much. So if I were to make this table a lot bigger, the ends would stay a lot flatter because of the center batten. But this is important because whenever I do really long tables, I might want to put another legs in here to have 6 legs, and I wanted to see if this would work. Speaking of the legs, I tried yet another design. I actually cut these octagons on the table saw, and all I did was I turned this taper right here to create the shoulder and then the tenon going in there. And I think for an outdoor bench that turned out pretty nice. Plus there's so many angles on this project, the octagon with their sharp edges I think worked out pretty well. I do think this particular bench probably taught me the most because I tried some other techniques for cutting out the mortises or the dovetails, and that I used 2 bits instead of the 1. I did find that just cutting that recess with the dovetail bit, it was somewhat violent. It was very aggressive and I did not like doing it. But removing the majority of the waste with a straight cut bit where I could go halfway down, because with the dovetail bit you're undercutting it, you had to go to full depth, and that might have been the big problem I was having in the previous tests. Well, with a straight bit I could remove a lot of the waste And then I only had to use a dovetail to get to that edge, and it just made things a lot less aggressive and more enjoyable. The other thing was working my table saw a lot more for the shaping, the edges and stuff like that, because it just made it a lot more efficient. And that's something that I will be able to apply when we really refine the batch productions of the little 18 by 18 ones that I'll be doing in the series in a little bit. The next few tables I was experimenting with were, again, shop equipment, because as I said before, shop equipment's the best equipment to practice on. I had originally bought all this pine to build another massive workbench, but the shop I'm going into, I don't think there's going to be enough space for it, but I wanted a small desk behind it. So I built that desk behind there. It's only about 14 inches thick, but it's just enough for me to keep my drinks in my little sharpening station. And then I built this one right here, which is going to be mine and my dad's sharpening station. It rolls around the couch. We'll have 4 to 6 grinders on it. It'll work out well. But the whole experiment with this series was using these same jigs, the same angles, the same techniques to build 2 different tables of different sizes. And I will tell you, it was a failure. They went together at the same time brilliantly. But when I stood back, I looked at this table and the legs, everything looks okay to me. On that table right there, well, here's 2 pictures. On the front view, I think it looks okay, proportion to the legs, all that kind of stuff. But from the side, notice that the legs come way towards the center. It looks funny. So that kind of told me that if I'm doing different widths, I'm probably going to have to come up with different jigs just for the splay out from the center. But the splay on these sides, those 2 tables have the same exact angle. So from maybe that aspect, I can use the same settings and it'll all work. The other thing I did was I continued my experimentation with legs. You can see this one right here is more of a bamboo style. I really liked making this style because any inaccuracies were kind of part of the style. You had to make sure your tenons were dead on perfect, but variations in thicknesses or the placement of the knuckles didn't really matter. Just get them close and it'll look alright. The legs on back were more of an organic style where they kind of bulged at the top and then kind of came down, more like muscles on the leg. Not sure I liked either one of those, but they're an option to play with. I also added something unique to all of the Battens that's going to make adding drawers after the fact a lot easier. But that'll be in an upcoming video. So there you go. In the next video, I restrict all the tables to my 18 by 18 design aspect. So all the legs are going to be the same, all the angles are going to be the same, but I'm going to show you ways of making those jigs to do all this work at those 3 different craftsman levels. And it'll be jigs that will allow you to design certain aspects your way. For example, this one right here helps you come up with the angles you need in order to make the jigs to make the splay just the way you want it. Because I can remove the screws on either end and change it up and look at the angles in real life at real scale to see what looks good to you or these look good to me. So come back next video and we will work on the production processes to make these tables at the 3 different levels. After that, I'll do a real production run. Well, as always, I want you to remember that it is always worth the effort to learn, create stuff, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.